Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone for being here. So I got asked by Bill, everyone's done this, I got asked by Bill too, to talk about open decision making, which I don't even know if it exists. But so I found our government's view of open policy making, which is a bit vague, a bit nebulous. But over here on the right, there are some real things, some actual existing technologies which allegedly can underpin open decision making. And I've highlighted the ones where I have some experience, where I'll try to talk a bit. I was told that I don't have to offer solutions, which is a great relief because I don't have any solutions for offering open decision making, but I'm going to bring up a lot of things and some of them are interesting ideas. So to start with, the citizen science. So we've got this abundant citizen science now, projects, a lot of them actually focused on biodiversity and conservation, but other projects which are, they're submitting data which can be reused or repurposed for conservation, like volunteered photographs, which weren't necessarily taken for that purpose, but you can get something from them and mine something from them. And I should probably say now, actually, the important thing about citizen science is the motor behind it is values. People do it because they believe in something, they believe things are important. And we often don't record that. We don't ask them why they're doing it until we do some sort of meta-survey afterwards. But actually, that's a very important thing to consider when this feeds policy, if it does. So alongside that, we've got open data from government. It's becoming cheaper to actually open the data up to industry and allow some value-added developments than it is to actually prepare a data set for someone who asks you for it for a commercial purpose. So Liz Truss saying some very abundant things about the champagne producing future of the UK. But one of the things I picked up on particularly, and I'll come back to this later, she mentioned the idea that we can, with open data, which is becoming available, we can detect live if a ship is acting suspiciously in a marine conservation zone. So that's an interesting idea to me, and I'll come back to it. Who could do that? Could any of us do that with open data? It's huge. So on the right here, we've got every photo submitted in a day to Flickr. In a gallery, in a room at the top, plotted on a map, and you can see the gaps, you can see the biases. This is one of the big issues of citizen science. On the left is just a quick summary of some deep learning that we've been doing to try and identify salient features in our photos. So if we want to mine this huge, constant stream of photographs taken for all different purposes to see whether there's something interesting to us, we can actually take off the shelf a network and some training weights which allow us to identify quite a few things that let us know this photo could be interesting to pass on to a human and they can do a better classification. So that's getting humans and machines to work together and each do the things that they're good at. So machine learning, it's really, really useful. It's really coming into its own now with this wealth of data, because even if a species hasn't been helpfully barcoded by nature, they all do have these very characteristic signals that you can pick up on. And here on the left, you've got bats being distinguished from acoustic signals to the best of the technical abilities. So you can see some species are not particularly well distinguished, but that's great. If there's uncertainty, I want to know it. I don't want false precision in a classification. And likewise, on the right, you've got some camera trap data where, because of the posture, the nature, the markings of animals, even though their position is changing and some interference is there in the photo, you can get a pretty rough classification of an animal to a group, and then you can again pass that on to somebody who can give you a more expert view. So you're cutting down the work that humans have to do in really making sense of this data. So we have to discover it, we have to interpret it, we have to filter it, and we have to make sense of it. And in order to do that, we need to bring together a lot of the existing citizen science projects. There are hundreds, if not thousands now. And for example, Atlas of Living Australia are trying to build communities, social media. They're trying to get people together, for example, the ant people, to all get together so that if you want to start an ant project, you find out which other ones exist already. You have a look at the protocols that they're using. You see whether you can harmonize in some way. Because otherwise, we're not going to be able to bring this data together and make it be worth more than the sum of the parts. And the kind of things we need to know, the boring metadata that nobody likes collecting, things like units and phenomena and the precision and the sampling protocol. But it's actually learning about science. If citizen scientists submit this sort of information, it's learning about science, because domain experts rarely realize that they have to be explicit about their assumptions and the terms they use. So It's exactly the same problem as when you're doing evidence synthesis. If you have someone in a silo who thinks that a diseased animal is defined in this way, this is Bill and Mark's example, and you have someone in another silo who thinks it's defined in another way, then you can't bring together their studies on counting diseased animals. So that period of reflection where people have to actually express what they're measuring and why they're measuring it is really important. And an example here is, for example, fitness for purpose varies depending on what you want to do. So for my purposes, it might be absolutely fine to bring together some tree records from a wildlife checklist and combine them with data from a single species study on tree health. For someone else, that might be completely inappropriate because the priorities in those two studies are wrong. And it's very exciting that GBIF are extending the Darwin core standard so that you can now actually attach a lot more useful data to the records that go into that huge global repository of data. So you can now tell something about sampling protocol. You can stratify the data that you find and see whether it's suitable for training or for some other purpose. So that's basically going to be brilliant. And we're actually going to be able to submit sample-based data to GBIF in future as well. I'm going to go fairly quickly over this bit, but it is important. I think we need to step back and consider what humans do best and what machines do best and how to use them together. Because we're all terrified at this idea that machines are going to take over. They don't have any ethics unless we give them ethics, and everything's going to be terrible. But actually, other people here can tell you better than I can that human experts, often the things they're proudest of are the areas where they are actually weakest. We have these blind spots, and we're very wedded to the idea that we're very good at a particular thing where we may not actually be so great. And at the same time, some machine learning techniques are proving to be better in some areas that we thought only humans could do, like hyperparameter setting, or even choosing a different model from a different family of models. But they have to know what families of models exist. If they only know about certain types of quant models for economic modeling, then we're all in trouble because they'll all come to the same conclusion. So I summarised some of the ideas of what makes a good expert and a good expert group from, again, Bill's and Mark's work and some other people's work. And those top three are things that machines do really well. They're almost the definition of something like a neural network. The admitting errors, you can also ensure that your algorithm, this don't work. Yeah, it does. That your algorithm will kick itself out of local minima and it will change course, and it won't sort of have that human characteristic of being very wedded to a dogma. You can get machines to work in teams, you can do ensemble modelling, but cross-disciplinary integration of models is actually still quite rare, partly because of this conceptual and semantic mapping. And that's where human diverse groups are so great, because when you get someone from another field, you have to express to them your values, your assumptions, and it may be the first time you've ever actually done that. That period of reflection, like I said, is really, really important. Machines are great on consistency, so if you train an algorithm to do a certain type of classification and then you freeze it at that point, you can resurrect it again later in time and do the exact same classification to see what's the value of your added information, for example. Whereas humans looking at that will have learned, they will have changed, they will have got new skills and new opinions. But the human experts that did really well in these studies gathered evidence from a lot of sources, and a machine can't off-the-shelf do that. An automated system doesn't know about the whole world. It doesn't know all the different places that we need to go and get information from. They're good at searching catalogues, so long as there's some metadata, but really that's our job, is to work out what to measure. And sometimes we don't do it completely. So this study here threatens to invalidate decades worth of work on mice to see what kinds of things stress mice, because they turn out to be very susceptible to the gender of the researcher. Mammalian males make mice very stressed, and they make them exhibit stress responses, which are often exactly what is being measured in the study. And very few people ever thought to record on every day who was feeding the mice, who was going into the room. So as we carry on doing the science, we learn more and we realise that there are gaps in the things we should have measured. But again, it's a trade-off. It's like the trade-off between passive and adaptive management, passive and active adaptive management, sorry, where if you start changing what you measure halfway through, then you haven't got a time series anymore, so you can't measure change unless you've got an infinite number of sensors and an infinite budget. So you've got to trade off between learning consistently and not getting, not measuring everything perfectly, and actually getting something done. Yes, sorry, in that, I forgot I had this slide. On that subject, it's tempting to just throw everything that you've measured into the mix and go, well, machines are really good at learning, machines can find patterns for me, so let's just see what comes out of it. But the reason, the critical reason we shouldn't do this is because we see a pattern straight away. As soon as you see that graph, the reason it's funny is because you made up a story to explain it, and that's the peril, that's why we should never fall into this trap of doing science without a hypothesis. It seems very popular now to just throw all the data together and see what comes out. Let's not. I like quantifying uncertainty, and we're going to have a very good talk on uncertainty. I've seen his slides, it's going to be good. We're going to have a good talk on that in a bit, so I don't have to go into too much detail. But the reason I'm interested in that is to direct the effort better for where we need to get more data, which is often expensive. So where in space should be sampling better to represent not just to not just fill the uncertainty gaps, but also represent the underlying landscape phenomena. But gaps in knowledge as well, in semantic classifications. eBird have just done a really nice study on their volunteer data, identifying the kinds of misidentifications that commonly happen. And the nice thing about that very statistical work is that they can firstly make better use of the data that was volunteered, but they can also train the users better in future, and they can alert them to likely misidentifications. So often we're going to still have gaps. If we find the gaps, we're not always going to be able to fill them. And some areas are difficult and dangerous to access, like Wolverhampton. And so maybe we could send some drones to go and take some photos, or take some water samples from a lake, or do some acoustic recording, or even, although we don't have sperm whales in Wolverhampton, but you could even send a drone to take a sample from the blow, which will tell you something about the immunological status of that animal. So that's really cool, and what it means is that in future we're going to be able to annoy all of the animals all of the time. So I think we can do it. So coming back to more sensible stuff, right? So this suspicious fishing idea, I know it's possible because some colleagues of mine are actually doing this at JRC in Italy. And they take data which currently is confidential, which is vessel tracks at NMEA format. And they mine that in a very extensive way to characterize particular behaviors like steaming and fishing. And what they can do from that is generate a raster, a map of fishing intensity, which you can see on the left there, and on the right I've overlaid protected areas. So the large area that's shaded is protected, but it's allowing exploitation. It's a particular designation that allows you to fish. The smaller areas are much more strictly protected, and it really looks from this as if they are being successful. So we have these holes in the fishing map. So in that particular case, we can see that this is apparently being successful. And that's especially important in areas like in the Arctic, where you're going to have new ecosystems appearing. We need to be able to project forward into time what the exploitation pattern is going to look like, because the winter on the left is going to start looking a lot more like the summer. So if we know in advance what kinds of things people are going to be doing, we can start planning, policing, making policy to try and protect at least some of those habitats. So this is a really complicated process that they went through to generate these maps. And I wanted to know whether any one of us could basically do that. It's got all sorts of steps which involve anomaly detection, but also identifying spoofing. So when people are actually lying about their location, which a lot of ships do, they will interfere with the signal. And the scientists were actually amazingly gracious and positive about the fact that anyone who was, moderately nerdy could actually do this. If you can get that data, you can pass it for free. It's an open standard, so you can find parsers. You need some ancillary data on fishing gear, but you can download that for free. If you're interested in protected areas, that data's free. If you've got some other value that you're interested in, then it may or may not be openly available. The actual code to do it, if you want to write your own, you can just look at the pseudocode, but there's also some actual implemented libraries in R. For the processing, that may not be free. It depends whether or not you're someone who can access one of these research clouds, but it's not hugely expensive to do. It depends whether you want to be able to do this in genuinely real time. And if you did want to combine with imagery from Copernicus, from the Sentinel satellites, there are also these platforms that you can actually use the imagery within the platform, but you can also share your code. And this is very important for reproducibility, so you can actually get someone else to run that, make a few changes, see what made a difference. So any one of us, supposedly, can generate some evidence, and we can put it out there as a pretty much reproducible workflow, and we can have it judged and reviewed by other people. But my question is, what would happen to that? If we as scientists are thinking that our evidence isn't getting into policy, then what happens to citizen-generated evidence? You know, when I'm not working as a scientist, when I'm just working as a hobbyist. So this is where I came to think about open decision-making and what it is, whether it can exist. So the internet's great for finding like-minded people and mobilising yourselves through online petitions, which can be really powerful. But what I don't know is how a lot of decisions actually get made. So in medicine, they're very transparent. You have metrics, which Ian described beautifully yesterday, based around the bottom line, the financial bottom line that you have to trade off. You can find open access papers which do these kinds of valuations, and decisions which are actually quite unpopular can be justified. You may not agree with the valuation that's been put on life, but it is completely transparent. I don't have to go into the conservation analogy because Ian's already done that really well. But there are some decisions I find really opaque. So the recent decision on the National Wildlife Crime Unit, which itself actually makes massive use of citizen science data to monitor raptor poisonings. It seems like a no-brainer to fund this. It's really, really cheap for what it does. But still, every 2, 3, 4 years, we get this decision coming up. And I can see as a citizen the questions asked in Parliament, and I can see the response. But I don't know what actually led to that decision, what swung it. There are no minutes of any meeting there. Was it those petitions, the many different petitions that I should have tracked down and signed? Or is it because currently we're still in Europe and we have to comply with certain European directives and it's too costly for us not to? So I don't know where to put my effort as a citizen. And that led me to look at some of these e-democracy, open democracy platforms. A lot of these, when I started to investigate them, they actually turn into just one long debate between 2 or 3 people, very linear in the sort of internet equivalent of green ink. But there are a few that are actually seem to have a bit more to them. So there's a project called Decent, and they've got these very modular tools. It all looks very digital, but they've been used in quite creative ways. So for example, in Madrid, they have used this, and not just online. The important thing is that they're looking at, they're running a campaign, they're getting public opinion, and they're also allowing people to participate by other means, like on paper or going into their local library. And they're looking very carefully at who's participating by those different means. So which age groups are the certain channels most important to? But what I liked most was that they're visualizing the networks. I don't know if you can see the links between these dots, but this is essentially a consensus being formed over a particular question. So you can see certain arguments tailing off and losing support, and then you can see other ones actually gaining support. And if I could click on that and I could see a piece of evidence, plus all the comments attached to it, plus all the votes for it from scientists or other people, I could filter them based on the type of people who approved or didn't approve. That would give me a lot more of an idea of how evidence was actually being used. And behind that, I would be able to see the kinds of links and alliances that I've been hearing the last few days are really important. So this is Eurovision voting, but this could be key advisors in science. It could be, I could see from this graph potentially who's the person who really makes all the difference. But I'm worried about this. But this is my Stan Openshaw tribute, my butt slide. The problem is, we've been hearing that it's all about relationships and trust. So if we expose all these sort of corridor dealings and little, informal conversations, if we expose them to the light of day, the feet below the swan of British politics, will they just wither away? Is that something that can actually survive? Or can people find a new way of doing that kind of thing? Can we do that transparently and still have the value of all these people that we've been hearing that are actually people working on our behalf, and putting our opinions to the right people, injecting and smuggling and bringing in these ideas, and planting seeds which sometimes don't flower for quite a long time. And I'm also a bit concerned about the idea of peer review, crowdsourcing peer review, that the best will naturally rise to the top. So for mathematicians, they love it. They do all this collaborative problem solving. And if there are any big mathematicians here, they can probably correct me, but my impression is that maths problems are not as wicked as the ones we're talking about. I could be wrong, but that's my impression. So I don't know whether peer review is really, crowdsourced peer review is really good for us here. And it's very popular, the idea that, you know, sort of research grants will be crowd peer reviewed, but I had a look at some of the reader comments in PLOS One, and some of them were bordering on cyberbullying. I don't know if I would publish in that. Some types of people are going to withdraw from the fray if we don't have some dignity. We see it in politics, with some politicians trying to make politics more dignified, but they are a minority. So, the end. Thank you. So it's a new era for citizen science. We've got to bring it all together. We've got to make sense of the data, but make it still be fun. Anyone can make evidence. That means I found out yesterday just how hard evidence synthesis is, and it's going to be even more challenging with all this stuff available. Whose counts? We could start getting people to tag evidence and data and other resources with their reviews and their comments. I like fitness for purpose because making someone state their purpose is a really good thing. A lot of us aren't completely honest with ourselves about what our purpose and our values are. And I've got the bug now. I'm really interested in policy pathways and networks, especially in UK politics, and I want to know more about them. What do they look like? I want to see them. And should they change? Will they change? So, thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks. Thanks so much, Lucy. Time for quick questions. Yes.
Thanks for a really fascinating talk. James Pierce-Hickins from the BTO. So we obviously engage a lot with citizen scientists, and one of the things that I've felt, and I'm interested in your comments on this, is there's real potential, excuse me, to use the analyses and the information that's gained from the data that's collected, and then feed that back to the volunteers as a way of kind of informing them, getting them further up to speed with the science, and then hopefully that they will then be better informed, maybe talk to the other, others who aren't involved, and there's kind of a virtuous circle there. Yeah. I'd just be interested in your kind of comments on that, because that's not a particular theme that's come out yet.
I think that's a really good idea, because otherwise it's not citizen science, is it? Like if you're just feeding somebody else's project, that would make it much less top-down, and you'll really get people engaging. Then they learn about the methods, the ways things can be wrong, the reasons things can be wrong. I think that's really powerful. I'd like to know more about what you do and how you do it.
Right, can meet at lunch.
Yes.
One more from this side, maybe? Yes?
Thank you. I liked your cheese and bedsheet tangling. But it leads to a sort of particular point that's coming up quite frequently now about the need to train students in this big data analyses approaches, and it was very strongly demonstrated in the last REF 2014 when people were reviewing a lot of papers on big data, and a lot of the academics are not yet fully aware of all the dangers in some of that big data analyses that are going on. And we need to really up our game on that, because a lot of people do think it's easy to throw all the data in and pull out new connections, but are not really sort of looking at the critical accuracy and correctness of that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, a lot of the people who are doing big data analysis are doing it in quite sort of mission critical ways, so they're banks and people like that, and actually they're probably paying more attention to those kinds of errors than a lot of the scientists, which is really, but a lot of people have jumped on a bandwagon and have put it in a research proposal, and big data isn't just a big file, but there are people who've been working with big data all along, and they're the people who actually do know about those kinds of problems and that we need to go back to and to talk to them. Yeah, I'll phone you and talk to you more about this.
Okay, can we give Lucy a great thanks for a fantastic talk?